GGC family, our devotion for this week is entitled Follow Paul as Paul Follows Christ by Elder Ernesto Tanchi Jr. and narrated by Deacon Joseph Tanchi.
In 1 Corinthians 11:1, Paul says, "Be imitators of me as I am of Christ." Paul was encouraging the Corinthian Christians to follow his example as he followed Christ. Jesus Christ lived a perfect life here on earth that we Christians can follow. The Apostle Paul was persecuting Jesus by putting Christians in prison. When Christ confronted Paul, Paul realized that in his ignorance, he was actually persecuting Christ himself. But because of the amazing grace and abundant mercies extended to him by Christ, Paul's life was transformed and forever changed. Paul was so grateful and thankful to Jesus that he lived a life worthy of our emulation. What characterized Paul's life that he was bold enough to ask the Corinthian Christians to imitate his life? There are at least two things we can learn from the life of Paul. First, Paul was mission-focused. To Paul, to live is Christ and to die is gain. Jesus had given Paul a mandate to preach the gospel. Jesus Christ saved Paul and entrusted him with a mission to share the gospel free of charge to the Jews first and then to the Gentiles. To Paul, sharing the gospel was a necessity because Christ gave him the commandment. If Paul didn't share the gospel, curse and woe to him. The Apostle Paul succinctly stated this in 1 Corinthians 9:16-18. "For if I preach the gospel, that gives me no ground for boasting, for necessity is laid upon me. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. For if I do this of my free will, I have a reward. But not of my own will, I am still entrusted with a stewardship. What then is my reward? That in my preaching I may present the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my right in the gospel." Second, Paul was willing to sacrifice everything for the gospel. The Apostle Paul accommodated himself to the customs and habits of the people he was sharing Christ with in order to gain their ear to the gospel. Paul is referring to matters of moral indifference. He was not sacrificing divine or biblical truth in order to gain the hearing of the people. The end did not justify the means. Paul says, "To the Jews he became a Jew." In Acts 16:3, Paul was even willing for Timothy to be circumcised if it would result in a wider hearing of the gospel. To the Jews who are under the law, Paul became as one under the law in order that he might win those under the law. To the Gentiles who were outside the law, Paul became as one outside the law in order to win those outside the law. To the weak, like those who were over-scrupulous over food, Paul restrained himself in not eating meat but just vegetables in order to win the weak. In 1 Corinthians 9:22, he said, "I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings."